you introduce themselves. And these are views expressed by those of us as the presenters. So today, our learning objectives for everybody is to, one, describe the benefits of engaging youth as advisors, articulate promising practices to meaningfully engage youth and young adults in advisory boards, and identify how these promising practices have been applied in existing youth advisory boards. And so we'll be sharing examples. So what are the benefits of engaging youth as advisors? And I'm sure everyone here has knows a bit about this, and it's probably why you've joined. But some of the benefits, if you can go to the next slide, that we might think about are, one, allows youths to represent their own interests. So a lot of times, like we have projects, and pediatrics especially, or in family medicine, and a lot of us actually are in projects in the community and also here at our academic institution that involve youth. And don't necessarily have access or think about how do we actually integrate their expertise as we're developing our programs and ideas. So it allows youth to represent their own interests and to be involved in planning and making decisions, ideally, for these areas that affect them and their peers. It also enhances ecological validity and provides opportunities for active civic engagement, really invests in youth. They gain skills, knowledge, and connectedness, and supports protective factors. And of course, there's a benefit to others around youth engagement by enhancing our own competencies and understanding as researchers, as adults, as community members, and increasing commitment and energy to our organizations. And then organizationally, we benefit by improving our programs, their effectiveness and sustainability, and gaining community buy-in and trust. And then community levels are to benefit by improving quality of life, coordinating youth services, and authentically embracing diversity by representing young people. And then, of course, researchers benefit from the patient perspective and youth perspective in their own programs and research, and can enhance their programs. And this is something that really is fundamental for why we need to engage youth and patients in our communities. So by 2050, it is projected that 60% of adolescents in the United States will identify as people of color. And in spite of all the money and research, the health disparities widen, disproportionately impacting people of color. And so improving the health and well-being of youth is a critical dimension of addressing health inequities and equity. And there's no better way to do that than to get youth experiences within the healthcare system. And youth experiences with the healthcare system can have long-term impacts on their health and well-being, and yet are largely underrepresented in the co-design and the delivery and evaluation of health-related programs and interventions. So, and it's not, even as imperative as this is, it's not necessarily easy. And so we kind of took a dive into what the promising practices are to meaningfully engage youth in advisory boards, and that is what we're here to share about. First, just to provide some framework, and this is, thank you again, Kathleen Tebb, for this framework. It's the Roger Hart's Ladder of Young People's Participation, and I'll just quickly go through this framework just in case it helps people, but also for you to all reflect on where you are in your work on this ladder. So this is developed for UNICEF. It represents a continuum of power. And the goal is really to maximize the opportunity for any youth to choose to participate at the highest level of their ability. So you can see from the bottom rung, young people are manipulated. They are decoration, they are tokenized. As you climb up the ladder, they're assigned and informed. At rung 5, they're consulted and informed. And then rung 6, adult-initiated shared decisions with young people. And then at the top 2 rungs, young people lead and initiate action. And at the top, young people and adults share decision-making. One other framework that also could be used more at an organizational level, if we go to the next slide, this is the spectrum of community engagement to ownership, which we also use as a framework. It's by Rosa Gonzalez, and you can see the little website on the side there. But just very quickly, the top row here is stances toward community. And then going down the y-axis, so it's stances toward community, what's the impact, what are the community engagement goals, the message to the community, and some activities that exemplify that this spectrum. So across the top, it's to ignore the impact is marginalization. The message to community is your voice, needs, and interests don't matter. So these are like closed-door meetings, misinformation. When you go to inform, it's more impact of placation, provide the community with relevant information. We'll keep you informed is the message. And some of the activities you might see are fact sheets, presentations, open houses. In the middle, there's consult, which the impact is tokenization, gather input from the community, messages, we care what you think, and some activities might be public comment, focus groups, community forums, and surveys. Then if we get to involve, the impact is giving voice. The message is you're making us think and therefore act differently about the issue. And some of the activities are community organizing and advocacy, house meetings, interactive workshops, community forums. And then where we really hope to push ourselves is to the latter part of here is collaborate, which is the impact is delegated power. The message is your leadership and expertise are critical to how we address the issue. This activities that could support this are in the form of MOUs with community-based organizations, community organizing, open planning forums, and citizen polling. And then lastly, defer to, where the impact is community ownership. The message is it's time to unlock collective power and capacity for transformative solutions. And some of the activities are community-driven planning, consensus building, participatory action research, participatory budgeting, and cooperatives. So just to take a minute, we want to make sure we have time for discussion, but maybe if you will be willing to post your reflection in the chat, we'll follow up in the discussion portion. So on what rung do you place your program's participation of youth? And what is one next step you can take to move youth participation in your work up the ladder? Is there a barrier you anticipate to moving up the ladder, and what is that? So again, on the right, we have the ladder of participation, and we welcome anyone to post their reflection in the chat. Anyone want to share? I'll just take 30 more seconds or so for people to think through and write some stuff down. Thank you. And I think it's Ale, or I could be mispronouncing. Thank you, Rana. Yeah, it's like we're hanging her out in the rung 4 or 5, where young people are consulted and informed or assigned and informed. And how do we push ourselves? Not just for young people, yeah, in general, maybe around our engagement. We're hanging around rung 4 or 5 if we're lucky. Thank you, Jessica says around 3 to 5. And Maggie's also 4 to 5. And funding it's funding, and it's like having the right infrastructure, the right partners, to do this work well. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Well, we hope as we move forward to give some ideas about how we might be able to partner to get us further up the rungs. And thank you, Ali. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. She's for the community engagement spectrum 2 to 3, lots of work to be done. And Marissa's sharing working with adults, but still think these items apply between rungs 4 to 5. How do we, it's true, it's like usually scrambling for the grant, you're writing it, and how do you actually move towards having more lead time where you can co-write, co-create the ideas? And Natasha also sharing rung 5-ish, working towards 6. A barrier is that we recruit and engage with our youth virtually right now. Yes, and it's hard to keep them meaningfully engaged and active, and very true. Thank you so much for sharing that. Please keep posting for anyone who wants to, and we'll keep an eye on the chat. So I'm going to turn this over to you, Sada, and hopefully what we'll do is share some of the promising practices we've identified and show how they have played out in our own work, and share ideas with this group, and hopefully spur some ideas about how to get over some of the barriers.
Thank you for starting us off, Anda. Hello, everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about promising practices for advisory boards in general, but I'm going to focus on what we did for one of our youth groups. And I want to acknowledge that, this work was done, via literature reviews that were done by Prabjot, in-house, who's not with us today, and myself. And also informal conversations with people you may know, like Chanel Williams from PTBI. She's the one who told me about the community engagement spectrum, and CTSI and CCHE. So I'm going to talk about 5 promising practices today, and I'll go in detail on separate slides. The first one is to take the time to lay the groundwork. It does take a lot of time to intentionally set up an advisory board. And secondly, how do you recruit members with that same level of intention and make sure that they are diverse? Third, compensating members for their expertise is critical. And I'll tell you a little bit about how we thought about doing that. The fourth one is reducing barriers to participation. And then the 5th is supporting meaningful participation. You can go to the next slide. So we'll give you some examples of how we did some of these things successfully. Our first example is with UCAAN, the UCLA-UCSF ACEs Aware Family Resiliency Network. And it's been a real honor to work with our advisory boards and patient advisors there. So UCAAN implements the ACEs Aware program on behalf of the California Surgeon General and the California Department of Healthcare Services. ACEs Aware is the first in a nation effort to promote early detection and intervention to mitigate the health and societal impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. And their mission is to educate, train, and support the California healthcare workforce to be able to identify, prevent, and treat the impacts of adverse childhood experiences and toxic stress across the lifespan. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that we have 4 community groups. Today, we're going to focus on 2 of our groups that have youth and young adults. So we were looking for 15 individuals, ages 16 to 26, to form a youth and young adult council who represent the diversity of California's Medi-Cal population. And we received an enormous response to our call for applications. And you can see on the right here is our recruitment flyer that we shared, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how we shared that. And we wanted to be able to move toward collaboration on that community spectrum of engagement and deferment of power. And so what we did is we took some of those applicants who had a little bit more leadership experience and skills. Sitare here was one of them. And we started forming that group first. We selected 6 of them to work with us on forming and the Youth and Young Adult Council. And they were actually also helping us finalize the candidates for the Youth and Young Adult Council, set the agendas, and facilitate the monthly Youth and Young Adult Council meetings. Next slide, please. So, you know, we have a lot of funded projects. We were just talking about funding earlier, that sometimes we don't have that funding to incorporate lived expertise as a deliverable, and we hope that that changes over time. However, you know, with the increasing frequency of the value statements regarding equity, it's important to find points of alignment with initiative priorities and to establish buy-in leadership and with decision makers. So for us, we really wanted to define the goal of what we wanted to do with a community council, especially the youth one, and then presented it with leadership, found advocates and champions who were able to champion it to our funders and our other leadership. And then we created a formal workflow of how we would incorporate that in our advisory board. Next. The goals that we had for our ACEs Aware advisory councils and patient consultants were that we wanted them to be able to offer input, experience, and lived perspective on guiding principles, priorities, and strategies of the initiative. We wanted them to provide feedback on specific products, including frameworks, clinical competencies, tools, resources, trainings, clinical workflows, and evaluation metrics. And just a reminder, we're a clinical training initiative. And so that's why a lot of what was in here is on clinical training. And then the last is to guide the identification and interpretation of evidence that informs clinical practice, education, and training. Regarding promising practice number 2 is related to member recruitment. So it's important for us to identify and use a variety of recruitment strategies such as word of mouth, social media, and recommendations from community-based organizations and other institutions. So there was actually an article written by the NIH Translational Science Award grantees who created advisory boards. They said that 80% of their patient advisors were recruited by someone they knew, and only 20% were recruited via flyers and ads. And we'll put a link to the article in the chat. Thank you, Sitari. So word of mouth is very important for diversity. And many of our youth and young adult applicants mentioned that they had found out about this opportunity from a counselor, teacher, or mentor. It's also important to recruit with intention and have a list of underrepresented populations that you want to include. So it's good to have a selection rubric to reduce selection bias. And it's essential to be mindful of not filling advisory boards with individuals who have the same types of experiences. So we recruited on a rolling basis over an 8-week period to give adequate time for word of mouth reach. And another promising practice is we recruited younger participants starting at 16 years old. There is a vast array of experiences starting from like 16 to 26 years old. It's a big difference. And so we wanted to be able to include youth and young adults from the beginning. And as I mentioned, at ACEs Aware, our young adult leads were selected to help plan all aspects of the council, including selecting the final candidates, setting agendas, and community agreements. The QR code on the right was a nomination form that we had asked people that we worked with who they wanted to recommend for us to reach out to for our Community Partners Council, which consisted of CBOs. And then once we got a lot of CBOs, we invited them to apply. And then we also told them, you know, if you're working with youth and young adults and adults, we have these other opportunities for them to join. So please share within your networks. And we also, I guess we'll go to the next slide to talk about the recruitment process a little bit more. Because we work with the Medi-Cal population at ACEs Aware, we specifically wanted to look at what the Medi-Cal demographics were like so that we would recruit council members that would be similar. As I mentioned, we wanted to also include underrepresented demographics, including foster youth, system impacted, formerly incarcerated, rural youth, Native Americans, immigrants, those who are working or living in coastal communities. And we wanted to include in the councils to promote inclusivity. And we sourced the list of community-based organizations who work specifically with these demographics to ensure a grassroots approach. We also collaborated with our host today, CTSI, the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, and the Center for Health Equity at UCSF, which is, our consulting groups who gave us feedback on our recruitment process. We then sent a call for applications to the community-based organizations that we previously had sourced out through personalized invitations. And again, our young adult leads were very helpful in the recruitment and selection process. And then we saved some open positions in case we didn't find to accommodate some specific underrepresented groups that we were unable to recruit. Next slide, please. So we had an overwhelming response. We had 177 applicants for 15 positions in a course of 8 weeks, which was also over winter break. So a lot of people were interested, and this underscores the enthusiasm and interest within the 16 to 26 age group and their eagerness to contribute to our initiative. One take-home lesson we have from our recruitments that we didn't think about initially is we would have liked to ask optional questions about various lived experiences to recruit a diverse group. So some of the applicants in their application had self-identified just based on the questions that we had, certain lived experiences, but we didn't ask about them for upfront. And so we had, it would have been good to have that as an option. 5 of the applicants, for example, self-identified as being unhoused. 14 applicants were either current or former foster youth. 3 applicants were either pregnant or were young parents. 2 applicants were either, formerly incarcerated or working with having family members who were incarcerated, and 6 applicants identified as LGBTIQQ. But again, we would have liked to ask an optional question about that. With regarding compensating our members, we value the time, and that it is a promising practice to be able to give money compensation through hourly wages and honoraria or gift cards, but we wanted to work with our young adult leads to figure out how they wanted to receive compensation. And so they told us they wanted either Venmo, Zelle, Cash App, or Amazon or Target gift cards. And so what we did, because as you may know, at UCSF, there is, to get reimbursed as a community member, you have to invoice. And so we actually outsourced our compensation so that our council members didn't have to invoice and could get paid quickly. Next slide, please. With regards to reducing barriers to participation, we set meeting times and locations that are convenient to the community. So because we're working with youth, after school was, or after work was a good time from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Is when we had our monthly online meetings. And all our meetings have been online. And we also provide childcare compensation to attend meetings if people need it. So even though it's virtual, and we work so that they can give us their full attention. We also ask them other questions about how do you fill out a W-9 without a social security number, et cetera. The last promising practice is supporting meaningful participation. As again, we mentioned earlier, our young adult leads were part of determining the agenda, and they had leadership roles in the council meetings, which was fantastic because in our first meeting, you could just tell that we were building community. Like people were gelling, and we have a survey that we give at the end of every meeting, and they said we loved that it was youth-led. So I think that was bringing people from across California who didn't know each other and were able to build that safe, brave space with strangers was definitely, partly because of those young adult leads. And so we also support infrastructure for our patient consultants to be active members on our team. We give them training on ACEs and toxic stress. Just now, we've been actually lately giving a 6-week training on Deduce, which is a qualitative method software that we plan on using to analyze themes from some of our meetings. And they're going to help us develop evaluation questions, code books, and textual analysis of our youth and adult council meetings. And with that, I will turn it over to Sitare.
So Tari, can I just pause for a second? I see that there's some questions about the reimbursement. And so for all, there's a
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Let's leave the questions till the end, and then so that way you guys can get through your presentation.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. We also wanted to share some examples of the impacts that our youth and young adult council members and patient advisors have had on ACEs Aware and UCAN work. And our young adult gave feedback on the ACEs Aware Stress Buster patient handouts, which were adapted to be more culturally acceptable and youth-friendly. And the Stress Busters are basically 7 evidence-based ways to manage the stress. And you can access these patient handouts as well as a 5-hour virtual training at acesaware.org/manage-stress. You can also scan the QR code, and I will go ahead and put that link in the chat as well. And just kind of like an FYI, if you do the training, you will receive and be qualified for continuing education credit. In addition, 2 of our young adult patient advisors presented a webinar highlighting how clinical teams and community-based organizations can support formerly incarcerated youth. It was attended by over 100 people in the ACEs community, and many more registered. And you can also view the recording and transcript and visit the link as well that I'll put in the chat. And we also had 2 patient advisor representatives sit on a working group for the ACEs and Trauma-Informed Care in Reproductive Health 3-part webinar series. For Reproductive Health Working Group, our patient advisors provided feedback on outreach opportunities, strategies, and then also on the webinar slides. And then this ensured that they were part of all the decision making. And I will put the link in the chat as well, and you may also scan the QR code. Our leadership also connected us with the Office of the California Surgeon General when we found out that they were about to create a youth and young adult council to inform their statewide ACEs and toxic stress campaign. We wanted, and we have met with the team responsible for creating the campaign over 6 times. And our youth and young adults have provided feedback on the name of the campaign, the tagline, the hashtags, the colors, the mood boards, and they're actually currently submitting photos and videos to be part of the campaign. And on the left, you can see pictures of the Youth and Young Adult Advisory Council, and the photo on the right comes from some of the feedback that was shared by our Youth and Young Adult Council members in one of the listening sessions. And I will put the link to the statewide ACEs and toxic stress campaign in the chat. And another exciting opportunity was that some of our young adult patient advisors were featured in an official video by the Office of the California Surgeon General on the statewide ACEs and toxic stress campaign that you may watch at healtogethercalifornia.org. I'll put the link in the chat as well, and the QR code will take you straight to the video. I highly recommend everyone to watch this video because it's really powerful. And I'll pass it to Maggie.
Hi, everybody. So you just saw an exemplar of youth involvement and engagement, but you can also see the tremendous amount of work it takes to get youth involved, recruitment, onboarding. And if we think about that framework early on about engagement, and we want to have that upper tier of youth involvement from the get-go, as a researcher, I think I want to put an application in, and R01s fund at the 10th or 15th percentile, which means that 90% of my grants will be rejected and 10% will get funded. And if I'm trying to create something for youth, it's really hard to get engagement when you don't get funded. And so I figured, and Anda and others, this is probably not unique. How can we build youth involvement and engagement meaningfully? And how can researchers get meaningful input in a low-hanging way, like a low-hanging fruit way, so that at UCSF we can get that youth involvement and do it in an effective way. And also, as you know, just putting, recruiting very quickly a bunch of youth together and just having a meeting, it doesn't work. It requires a lot of team building and onboarding. which I think are major barriers to having this kind of early consultative role before actually having funding. Most of us engage youth after the funding happens and not before. So with that, we discussed with our partner, the YMCA, and they also thought, hey, we have youth. We know how to engage. And thus created a partnership. And we came together to apply for a Eugene Washington Pecori Award to build that research training capacity for youth in terms of youth advocacy and research involvement. And part of that was to develop a youth research advisory council through the YMCA. As a goal is to act as a mechanism for including historically marginalized youth to drive medical research that promotes health and equity. Again, thinking it is really hard to reach youth. There's a reason why we talk about historically marginalized and underrepresented. There are many factors that prevent engagement from the academic side, and we needed experts in the field who know how to engage youth. We recruited 3 to 5 youth research leads. These are all persons in their 20s that had leadership skills. They also ran programs at the YA and throughout the city. And then we created a youth advisory board, committee, which included 10 youth, which were assembly members. And they were trained on research methods, history of research, really training for advocacy so that youth could be understand why would researchers come to them, giving kind of that so what meaning, and so that they could use this platform as advocacy for the youth voice. And that way we had a group of youth who could easily be engaged across multiple arenas of research to give researchers sort of that that insight and input. These individuals were trained via an iterative developed curriculum that was a sort of bi-directional, and it was standardized. This went through multiple iterations. This was kind of stemming from our previous, we had another Pecori to get family involvement, but realizing that family involvement curriculum didn't quite fit perfectly with youth. So, taking lessons learned in terms of the engagement. There were seven modules that were created, which introduced youth to the committee, talking about health equity and health, social determinants of health, how to advocate for oneself and one's community, dealing with conflict management and resolution, intro into medical research and ethics and research and racism in health, which then at the end allowed a youth to be kind of trained in how to work with researchers, as well as how to give one's voice and speaking, again, to give that bi-directional research input. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Precious. And again, thank you so much, Precious. And I don't know if Dante was able to come today for such a meaningful partnership with you guys. You guys are amazing.
Of course, no worries. Thank you, Maggie. So as Maggie mentioned, my name is Precious Ogbonna. I am the Associate Director of Teen Programs here at the YMCA of San Francisco, working specifically with the Urban Services YMCA and the Buchanan YMCA. And I'm just here, like Maggie said, to speak a little bit about the promising practices that showed up in real time for us during our time conducting the TRUE Project, which is an advisory group training program. So some of the information that I'm going to share, you've previously probably heard or has previously been shared. But it's important to note that when working with young people and teens, it isn't always a one-size-fits-all situation, but hopefully what I can, or some of our promising practices can be helpful. And so their first promising practice, my apologies, the foundation of engaging young people is to make sure that they feel comfortable. And during our orientation, we took time to build trust and community with the young people that would be participating and the adult facilitators that will be conducting the training. We also had a community builder activity to start off each session that we had with our young people and an intentional closing for the end of each session together. And these could be anywhere from check-in questions or games that may be competitive in nature or self-paced. It all just depends on what the vibe was of the group that day. And then we have our community agreements, and these are really our guiding principles of how we conduct ourselves during our sessions. They are very different from rules, and we make a point to note that rules are created, they're created for us based on the spaces and places that we go, but agreements are co-created, and there's a level of consent and collaboration that goes into that. That doesn't, like, that we don't see or experience or factor into when establishing rules. So it's always super important to revisit this or revisit your community agreements as often as you can, and ideally like during each session towards the beginning, so that youth are aware of what their expectations are coming into the space. And then in terms of compensation, we have noticed that youth tend to participate on a more consistent basis when they are being compensated for their time. Just point blank period. So especially when that compensation is money. And in some of our other programs, we notice success and retention when that financial compensation is on a consistent basis. So for example, receiving wages every 2 weeks, opposed to a stipend at the end of like a few months or like a semester. It serves as a major tool for consistent participation and attendance, like across the board with all of our teen programming here at the Y. And they may also be interested in other forms of compensation, like letters of recommendation for college or job references or anything like academic based, for example. We also had dinner at the beginning of each session, food that was delicious and hopefully could be considered nutritious as well. Our young people are growing, and so they're often tired and super hungry. So providing food and brain breaks and bio breaks are helpful when getting through our 2-hour sessions. And then in regards to recruitment, like we reached out to a majority, if not all of our peers that work in teen programming throughout the city for other community-based organizations or on school campuses like college and advisory councils, counselors, teachers, and or other levels of school admin. They were super effective and able to help us support by spreading the word and providing recommendations of young people who are just interested in pursuing careers in medicine, policy, and advocacy, or just super involved in any like on-campus or community programs or activities. We also took the time to table at schools and community events and connect firsthand with folks that were interested in applying, so we could answer any questions that they may have had right then and there. And this is super important. Like, it was very important for us to have a group of young people from backgrounds representing multiple parts of the city and different dimensions of diversity. And this was accomplished in large part by leaning on our peers across the city and our other, like the access that we have to other young people in our existing programs throughout the Y. Next slide, please. Thank you. Barrier reduction and removal. It's an interesting topic just because it looks different for each young person. So for one youth, it could just be like a reminder text of like a Google Maps location for our next meeting, and that's helpful for them. But for another youth, it could be available parking access where we're having our meetings for their personal vehicles or for like rideshare options when they're being picked up or dropped off. And we made a point to prioritize service connecting for our young people and their families to services that we firsthand provide here at the Y, like food pantries, academic supports, job readiness training, and workforce development programs, to name like just a few of them. And then also considering like the hybrid model and having like a Zoom meeting projected on a screen in a room of folks who are able to gather in person. And this accommodates all of our youth because some of them are experiencing commute challenges or schedule conflicts. In our first cohort specifically, who do the consultation work now, one youth attends UC Berkeley and another youth attends UC Merced. Sorry, can you all hear me? Okay, cool. One student attends UC Berkeley and the other attends UC Merced, and so they may not be able to be there in person, but they can join on their phone using their AirPods or their headphones. And it just made the most sense for those participating in the consultation process, as the kiddos who are going through the training modules were there firsthand in person. And yeah, just making sure that our meetings are accessible via multiple forms of public transportation for kiddos who feel comfortable commuting in that way. And then meaningful participation of course, is one of the main components, like making sure that our young people feel comfortable enough to share intentionally in our spaces. This goes hand in hand with like our earlier practice of laying the groundwork. And we see with community building, giving youth the space to lead portions of our time together, so we can encompass this idea of like the co-created space. And this gives them the opportunity to practice and develop some of those leadership skills like public speaking, critical thinking, and collaboration that they're hoping to gain from our space and that we're hoping to give them as well. And finally, we always take time to celebrate our young people and all of their hard work and dedication to our success. Just a few nights ago, our youth had the opportunity to present their final thoughts and learning goals with community stakeholders from both the YMCA and UCSF. And at this event, youth were awarded like a certificate, a laptop, their stipend, a Letterman jacket, t-shirts, and a whole bunch of other stuff after completing their mini presentations. And I've noticed that the youth enjoy celebrating their accomplishments, whether small or large, because it gives them the opportunity to reflect on their time and participation, as well as articulating and advocating for their interests and their own priorities. So thank you, and I'm going to pass it back over to Anda.
Great. I think we want time for discussion, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. I think I'll just highlight two things. In the literature, we found that there are two gaps. One is, what is the impact on youth in participation? And one is, what was the actual impact of including advisory boards and youth advisory boards in the project? And so those are two areas that we're specifically looking at through different, there's a youth empowerment scale we're using pre-post, and also have been mapping out the different areas of impact we've had, not just on the youth, but on the project, and also in consultation. The whole goal is to create a sustainable mechanism for youth engagement upstream in the research process, so that people aren't having to recreate these advisory boards, but can we use this advisory board to support other research projects and have something that's on the ground ready to go. So with that, though, I think we will just go to the end. We'd love for you all to reflect on where you are in the spectrum of engagement, and also where your project might be able to, is already incorporating some of these practices or could incorporate more of them, and if it helps with any of the barriers. And I really appreciate all the questions that have been in the chat. But I'll stop there for just a few minutes of discussion. If anyone wants to unmute.
Or have your hand up.
We have about 3 minutes, you all. So if you have any burning questions, I think, Angel, you have a question? Please unmute yourself.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, everybody. First of all, cheers and congratulations to everyone on that successful event on Monday night. I was in attendance, supremely impressed with the adults, with the scholars, everyone in attendance supporting the researchers and scientists and so on. So that was a nice treat for me after a long workday. So thanks for the invitation, and I hope to get many more in the future to support the event of success that I saw. My question here is, I thought I heard during the event that the young scholars, they're available to consult or to provide input. Is that correct?
Thank you. It's almost like we planted you there on how, but yes, I mean, this is the whole point. So once we have two cohorts who have been trained in the curriculum, so that they have a good trusted group, they understand research. And now what we've been doing is kind of disseminating through UCSF that they're available for consultation, and we have successfully been included in and supported a other PCORI engagement award. The YMCA is serving as consultants on that successful proposal. And then we've been consulting on some things like questionnaires or survey design, but also they've been included in 2 proposals going forward to the NIH, I believe. And they're built into that to consult with those projects quarterly, but also the YMCA is built in there as support, because as you all know, like keeping these youth engaged successfully and effectively takes work on our end. And so that infrastructure is really important. So we have a consultation model and that anyone can reach out to and utilize. And I'm really hopeful that this will help spare like our community from overtaxing them and also spare us. It's just more efficient, and the YMCA does such a great job facilitating and engaging the youth that in a way that we could just not possibly do.
Absolutely. And at this time is exclusively focused on consultation. The consultation model is focusing on research studies at the moment, or it will remain in that space. Because, for example, in my role as the UCSF University-wide Pathway Programs Manager, one thing I'm looking to do is to better inform the way we approach applications for internships and summer camps that we offer here out of UCSF. And I would appreciate a youth voice such as this, but this may not be an appropriate youth voice population though. So I'm wondering about that.
I mean, I think they were also talking about advocacy in health and wellness. So that may fit to the health and wellness bucket. Talk to the youth leads too about some of the stuff that I do as a medical director for youth. So, again, I think there's a broader consultation. Again, these are trained youth who know about research now. They're like, hey, we want a pilot. You don't have to explain pilot. We're going to do a case control study. You don't have to explain that.
Oh, excellent.
So, and how to engage them, especially for human subjects, so they understand that. What are human rights in medicine? So, it has this broader activity. And so, yes, again, research is such a fun, it's such a narrow topic area, and finding that expertise is so difficult. And all the precious, and also Dante, I see you're on, discuss further.
Thank you.